Okay, welcome to another edition of the Skull Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Henk, and today my guest is Alex Shvartsman. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. So, what have you got to go on, Alex?
Doing really well. Very excited still for the new book release. It's kind of like a birthday that stretches out to several weeks after the actual date because you're still celebrating, you're still getting all the feedback from your regular readers because they get to pick up the new book and live in that world for a few days or a few weeks, depending on how quickly they read. So it's always a nice time to after months and months of solitary work, putting a book together to
What is
actually.
it? What's the book? What's the name of the book?
So the new book is called Kakistocracy. It is a second in series. It's an urban fantasy novel set in New York City. The first book was called The Middling Affliction, and that came out about a year and a half ago. This is the sequel, and I will be working on book three starting next year.
Okay, what's the purpose of the book?
So this is a novel which deals with how the worst of us can sometimes climb into the positions of power, and how the characters who live in a magical version of our real New York City get to deal with the consequences of it and deal with living in that sort of environment. So yes, kind of ripped from the headlines, but of course it's a completely different set of problems and issues from what people face in the real world.
Have you read City on Fire or Metropolitan, like the books?
No, by which author?
It's I forget the author. I forget when I put it up, everyone will see who it is. But they're both really good, and it's like basically about like the whole planet is a city basically,
Mhm.
but there's magic involved in it. There's also it just reminded me of that, like the a little bit of the theme of your book reminded that.
Is that China Miéville by any chance?
No, no, it's not.
Okay, it sounds like a premise for one of his series.
Okay.
But yeah, so in this, what I've done with my series is that this is definitely New York City, which is where I live. It is Brooklyn, which is the borough I live in, and it's very recognizable. There's a lot of landmarks. There's a lot of locations that may not be real, but they're based on.
I'm in Long Beach, so I'm about like 30 minutes from you.
Oh, okay. So I'm in Sheepshead Bay, and a lot of it had to do with me wanting to write a magical version of Brooklyn that doesn't just look like Williamsburg. So it's not just all hipsters and like kind of the Brooklyn that you see in the movies and the TV shows. It's not really like.
Well, I lived in Williamsburg when Williamsburg was not hipster center. I mean, it was like 98. It was not good then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's still not representative of the borough at large, right? And so I wanted to write what South Brooklyn really is like, but also add vampires and dragons and monsters and magic users, like you do.
Well, of course, why not?
Exactly.
So, the how many books do you have out? This is a second in a series.
This is the second in the series. I do have another standalone novel as well as several short story collections out. I started out writing short stories because I found that to be a lot easier, and at my level of patience, it was easier to just get each story out and send it out to magazines. So I've had over 120 short stories published, and most of those before I even started trying to write novels. So I have
Okay.
a few short story collections that collect those. I'm still writing short stories because they're like popcorn. They're really, really difficult to quit.
Do
And
you stay kind of in the same genre, like the fantasy or sci-fi or fiction? I'm not sure what exactly your focus is.
so I write speculative fiction, which means that yes, it includes science fiction, fantasy, maybe even a little bit of
That's what
horror.
editor told me. He's like speculative fiction. I'm like, what the fuck is that? But
So
yeah, it's a mashup kind of.
speculative fiction is a catch-all term, which it doesn't really exist in English, right? In other languages, the word fantastica encompasses all genres, and there actually have been some critics that tried to introduce fantastica as an English term, but an average person will not know what that means. But
Right.
essentially, it's any kind of a story that has a strong speculative element. So whether it doesn't matter if it's a dragon or a spaceship, right?
Okay.
We imagine things that don't exist in our world, and we create works that are hopefully enriched by adding those elements, right? Because if those elements don't enrich the story, then why introduce them in the first place, right?
Wait, well, why would you like say I guess Game of Thrones would be categorized as like straight fantasy? You know, what would make it speculative fiction as opposed to just fantasy?
So fantasy is speculative fiction. Just speculative fiction as a term is more inclusive, so that you can actually talk about a Stephen King novel in the same breath as talking about a Ray Bradbury novel.
Right.
They're certainly very different. They have very different writing styles. They're different subgenres, but they're all speculative fiction. They all have that element of the fantastic that doesn't exist in, like Nick Spark novel or something, or some kind of or a Danielle Steele book.
So it would be a little bit of a mashup, like maybe I guess like Event Horizon or Alien would be kind of like because it's kind of cosmic horror, so it's horror and sci-fi. Would that be more along the lines of speculative fiction?
Absolutely. All of those, it's just a really big tent, right? It's a big tent that includes all of those things, as long as there is something wondrous, something that you can't encounter in the real world. So, if you just write a spy thriller, right? That's not speculative, because all of that stuff could technically happen. You could have, adventures and Bond girls and whatever else, but
Well, there's a lot of stuff that could technically happen. I mean, the multiverse, like talk to Elon Musk, he'll tell you all about it.
right, but until there's been proof of it actually happening, it's still speculative, and that's exactly where that word comes from.
Okay, all right, awesome. So when does this come out?
So that came out October 17th. So the book is already available. It's on all the major bookstores. It's on all the online sources. It's available in ebook and audiobook. So whatever format people like to consume their fiction in, they can get access to it. And what I would say separates it from most of the similar urban fantasy books is that it's a humor book. I mean, it doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a lot of jokes in it, and it's meant to be light, fun reading that still has an adventure plot, still has characters that hopefully the reader will care about. But there's a lot of pop culture references, a lot of jokes. So think Men in Black more than Alien.
Okay. Well, they're good for different reasons, definitely. Um, so how what are you doing with that? Are you doing like a book trailer? Are you doing is it available on Kindle? Is it available on paperback and hardback? Like what formats is it available in, and what can people look at and check it out?
So it's available in all formats. You got the paper book is available in bookstores as well as everywhere online where you can buy books. The ebook is also available in all the formats, and the audiobook is on Audible and on all these other platforms as well as in libraries. So people can enjoy it in whichever way they interact with books. I personally really love audiobooks because that's the time I have to enjoy other people's books. Because if I have time to read, I have time to write. But
Right.
audiobooks are something that I can listen to when I walk my dog, when I drive a car, at the times when I can't read.
You're
So
going
I
on a long trip. I enjoyed it on a long trip. Yeah.
exactly. So I listen to my books in audio. So it was really important for me that that's one of the formats in which the book is available. And I had a wonderful actor record the book. His name was Patrick Boylan, and he recorded both the first book in the series, The Meddling Affliction, as well as Kakistocracy. So yeah, he's done a great job. So if people prefer to listen to the book rather than read it, it's available that way. But you can certainly get it for the Kindle. You can get it pretty much in any format in which books have been available historically.
Do you have it in hardcover?
No, that they did not make it in hardcover, just the paperback. Hardcovers are expensive, man, and I'm almost glad that it came out in paperback because I'd rather more people could get it right away. Because a lot of publishers they'll put out like a $35 hardcover, and if you want a paperback, you better wait a year, right?
Right.
So on one hand, it's ego stroking to have that hardcover, but on the other hand, I want the readers to spend like under $20 to read my book.
I understand, but I'm a book nerd, but if I really like a book, I want it in hardcover. Like I really like Dune, so I have Dune in hardcover. I really liked Dracula, like Frankenstein. I have both of those in hardcover. I don't know. It feels like a little bit more special.
It does. But think about it. These are your absolute top tier choices, right? When you
Right.
encounter a new book by a new author, do you really want to shell out that extra money for the hardcover, or do you want to first try it in a less expensive fashion, like getting a Kindle book or getting a paperback, and then if you really love it, then you can track it down in hardcover afterwards.
Yeah, no, well, I definitely read it first. I hate Kindle because I hate to look at stuff. I'd rather, be able to read it. But yeah, no, I would read it, but then if I liked it enough, I'd buy it in hardcover. So how many books you have out now? You said there's a second in the series, but you have other books out as well?
That's right. So these two books are, the first two in the series. There will be a third one, hopefully by the end of next year, though I'm not really sure that will be up to the publisher for the schedule. I have a standalone fantasy novel called The Redeem's Crown, which is kind of like the world of Game of Thrones meets the character arc of Breaking Bad, and
Okay.
that's a standalone book. So that's for people who like Game of Thrones but don't like how it ended. And beyond that, I have a couple of short
Well,
stories.
that's just how the TV writers ended it. That's not how George R. R. Martin ended it because
Well,
he
that's
hasn't
right. But
ended it
George R. R.
yet.
Martin didn't end it, which is also something we're always
Exactly.
not to
Yeah.
like. So this book has a definitive ending.
Okay.
As opposed to the current Song of Fire and Ice series, in the book form, or Game of Thrones in the TV form.
Were you thinking it was going to be a trilogy when you started it, or it's like you figured out to wrap it up?
So I've always envisioned it as a trilogy, but the world is interesting and rich enough. So if there's enough interest, I could certainly continue writing the books in that series. But there is a big bad that the characters are dealing with, and that's going to take a trilogy to resolve. Now, one of the things that I've always had kind of been a pet peeve for me are books that are not telling a complete story. You get like a third of a book, and then if you want to continue reading, you got to buy the second book and the third book, but they're really just one really, really long book. I don't like that, and I don't write like that. Every book has its own story that is definitively concluded by the end of the book, because I trust the readers. I
But
trust
books
the
that like
writing.
leave way too many loose ends. You're like, what's going on? I don't know. Just it feels like it abruptly stopped. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't like that at all. I think that authors who do that don't trust the reader is going to like their work enough to come back to the next book in some way. So
No,
I
really.
try to write my books where you're getting a complete story, you're satisfied by the end. Sure, there may be like some loose threads that lead to the next book, which is fine, but you don't feel like I've just left you stranded in the middle of a cliffhanger, and then you have to wait a year for the next book to come out.
Okay. Are they is one like a direct continuation of the other, and do you have to read the first one to read the second one? Like, I'll give you a brief example. Like, everything I do, I kind of have in the same continuity.
Mhm.
So if I write like now, like I've written three books, and they're all like vaguely linked together, but I describe the first one is like Mad Max the Road Warrior. Like, you don't have to see one to see the other.
So these books can absolutely be read as standalones. In fact, I've actually sent the second book to several beta readers who I've made sure have never read book one, to make sure that the fact that they haven't read book one was not a major detriment to their enjoyment of the book, and they said that it was fine. Would I prefer that people read book one first? Sure. Are there references to book one? Absolutely. But they are, if you happen to pick it up and you didn't read book one, you would still be able to enjoy it.
Okay. One thing like this, what I try and do is like I'm like, well, the other one is just more backstory, but you don't need to understand what's going on with this story. Is that
Exactly.
kind of along the lines of what you're saying? Okay.
There are characters who change and who grow throughout the series, and if
Mhm.
you want to follow them alone, then yeah, reading it one by one is beneficial. Think of it as a CSI episode, right? Like, I mean, you can watch any one episode, or a Star Trek episode. You can watch any one episode as a standalone, but you will probably get even more out of it if you've read, or if you watched multiple
Right,
episodes.
it'll flesh
You
the
know who
characters out more and flesh the background out more. Yeah.
Right, but you can absolutely, just sit down and watch a Star Trek episode out of order, and you'll probably be fine.
One thing I've noticed is like with older books, and maybe I'm just showing my age, but I like older books better, because they have instead of like jump in, bang, pow, and then maybe they show a little bit later on. Like they have a little bit of build up, a little bit of backstory, and like I remember, I don't know if you read the book Lucifer's Hammer, where a giant meteor hits the earth, and the first 100 pages of that is just talking about all the characters, and they're just going about their normal lives. And then a meteor slams into the earth, and everything gets apocalyptic overnight. But now you've spent 100 pages building everything up, so you really feel for the people and their trials and tribulations and what they go through. Um, I was wondering, how do you approach your books, and would the second one not have as much backstory as the first one? Like, so you don't have to like start all over again.
So I do want to make sure that I reintroduce the characters to the point where if you haven't read the first book in a long time, because there's a long time that passes between the book releases, at least a year, sometimes more. So people who read the first book, in April of 2022, may not remember exactly what happened when the second book came out in October of 2023. So I do make sure that there are elements that are reintroducing it, but it's all about striking a balance, right? Because you also don't want to piss off the readers that are picking up those books at the same time and they're reading them back to back. So you don't want to
Right.
just kind of reiterate the entire, like, oh, then this is what happened in book one. And it is a balance that's achievable. You just have to
Right.
get
You want to make it
it.
interesting. You don't want to like people to feel like they're like you just cut and paste and they threw it in front of them.
I feel so. What I do with these series in particular is at the beginning of each book, there's almost like a small standalone adventure that where the characters have a problem to deal with, and later in the book you find out that it does have ramifications. So it's not a throwaway. I mean, it does have ramifications of what happens later in the book, but it's a good way to reintroduce the world and the characters and kind of give you an idea of the pacing and the kind of story that it's going to be. So when you read that first chapter or first couple of chapters, you get almost like a short story to start things off, and then things kind of advance from there. And I think it's a really good way to a reintroduce the characters, b give the reader that, like, if they're, let's say they're looking at the early pages of the book in the bookstore or an online bookstore that lets them preview a certain number of certain percentage of the book, it gives them a really good freebie preview of what kind of story is going to be, and I think it works.
Okay, awesome. Let me ask you a little bit about the way your approach and your style. Like I've noticed that people used to back in the day really hate first person, but now a lot of people use first person, especially a lot of like indie authors or self-published authors. And not that they're necessarily bad. I've read some of the worst crap from like major publishers, but it just like styles change over time. How do you approach stuff?
I think it depends on the story, right? So urban fantasy readers, which is the genre that these books are in, they're very used to first person narratives. This is the way that Jim Butcher and Simon R. Green and a lot of the other giants of the field tell their stories. So they're already used to first person, and it allows you to get deeper into the character's head and identify with the character more. It allows you to play with voice a lot more when you have a very snarky kind of very sarcastic character. Being inside of their head is a benefit.
I guess you have
So
to kind of like the character, whether you identify with them or not. You have to like him to put up with him.
yeah, I mean, if you don't like the character and you're in first person narrative, that book is in trouble and that author is in trouble, right? Like, you have to write the character, even if the characters themselves, they don't have to be perfect, right? They don't have to be a perfect human being, because perfect human beings aren't interesting, right?
Right.
We watch
It
shows,
also doesn't exist.
we watch TV shows about like criminals trying to like commit a heist, not because we also want to be a criminal and commit a heist, but because those people are interesting and they lead interesting lives. So your character doesn't have to be perfect, but they have to be interesting. They have to be relatable, and you have to, in the perfect world, you have to root for them to actually win whatever, in whatever situation that they're dealing with. So writing a compelling character like that is in many ways easier in first person. What's more difficult is that you can't jump in and you can't tell part of the story that's taking place somewhere else with a character, your point of view character can't see it. So there's a
Right.
restriction on the writer making my job more difficult, but in no way does it, make your job as a reader more difficult, because once I've solved those problems, assuming I did my job well, then the story should be seamless for you.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, obviously, you have like flawed characters that do very interesting things, like Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is a great example of that, I think. Hi, this is Henk. Brief intermission from a scheduled podcast. I just wanted to ask people to help support me. I'm trying to give a light and a voice to indie authors and indie artists and indie musicians that don't really get out there. And I like to keep this as ad free as humanly possible. But in order to do that, I need your support. So it would really help me out if you could support me. As little as $3 a month is a minimum tier. That would be great. So up above is the link. Click on that and you can support me. Thanks, and back to our regular program. All right, so let me ask you one more thing. Like, some people prefer like present tense, some people prefer past tense. You know, how do you approach it when telling a story?
So for these books, they're in past tense, and I think in most cases that works better. Present tense works for certain types of stories, but I feel like it's one of the tools that we have in our toolbox that are stunt writing, right? And there's nothing wrong with stunt writing. Stunt writing could be stunts are really fun to watch, right?
I've never heard
But
that
you
before.
don't want
So
to watch a
writing,
stunt,
yeah.
but you don't want to watch a stunt for the duration of an entire book. So I think present tense works better either in a book that is uniquely suited for it or in a short story, because in a short story you can get away with all sorts of weirdness that we wouldn't necessarily want to read in long form. For example, you can write a short story that is told entirely through Walmart receipts, but you
Right.
probably wouldn't want to read a 100,000 word novel told that way.
No, you're right. Yeah. No, you got a point there. So did you vary it up a little bit with all the short stories? Because you said you have a ton of short stories out there, right?
Yeah, and that's how I learned how to write. So I have no MFA, I have no like writing background. English is my third language. So I had a lot of
Oh, what's your first and second language then?
Russian and Ukrainian.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, so I learned English when we moved to this country from the Soviet Union, and I was about 14 years of age. Up until then, I didn't speak English, and it took me a long time to get comfortable enough in it to start writing fiction. When I did, I also didn't know a single writer or editor or anybody involved in the publishing industry, so I couldn't get any feedback. I had no idea whether I
Right.
was writing nonsense or publishable fiction. And so my genius plan was to start writing short stories and sending them out to magazines. And once those magazines began publishing them, I would know that I could actually write publishable fiction because I would have proof. And then I could write a novel. Long story short, I ended up spending almost a decade writing short stories because they're so much fun. They don't require a lot of time commitment. You can try on all sorts of different styles and writing techniques and just crazy stunts, and it's just a lot of fun. And I still write like writing short stories. I still write at least a couple of short stories per year, sometimes more. Usually it depends on what anthologies I get invited into. So when I love it when people invite me into an anthology, because not only do I get to write a brand new short story, but it's usually a story I had no plans on writing whatsoever because it's influenced by the theme of the anthology.
Yeah,
So
I just put out an anthology and I told everybody I just want like kind of Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt style stories, and pretty much everyone matched that. It was great, but there's a huge variety of styles in there.
yeah, exactly. You can do all sorts of different things. I participated in an anthology earlier this year that combined Lovecraftian horror elements with the setting of Winnie the Pooh. And I thought it was just such a fabulous idea. And I was like, well, everybody's going to kind of write the same story, aren't they? But then I thought about it some more and I thought I had a really unique take on it. And the editor assured me that they got plenty of varied material. So I think you can, even a setting that you think kind of invites the obvious, writers are very, very smart folk and they're very competitive when it comes to coming up with unique stories. So if you give a writer an obvious plot, then they will work extra hard to make sure that they come up with embellishments or ideas that'll be out of the left field, but they'll feel natural when you're reading them.
Yeah, I was kind of afraid with the anthology because, like, everyone knows I'm a huge cosmic horror fan and a huge Lovecraft fan. So I thought, maybe everybody's going to kind of like put stories along those lines. No, it did not happen at all. Like, everyone has their own unique take, their unique stories. It was a great experience, actually.
So I actually have a long history of lampooning Lovecraft. My most successful short story, the one that won an award and has been translated, I think, to over 10 languages at this point, is called Explaining Cthulhu to Grandma. And so in the story, there's a magic pawn shop, and somebody brings in Cthulhu in this pocket dimension, which looks like a snow globe, and they bring it in on pawn, and then the pawn shop owners have to figure out what to do with it. So there's all sorts of wacky adventures that happen from that point on. But so I had that. Then I wrote another story called Dreidel of Dread, the Very Cthulhu Hanukkah, which is basically a schlocky Christmas story, but instead it's a Hanukkah story and involves Cthulhu.
No,
So
that sounds
I really
yeah,
like
no, that sounds clever actually. Yeah.
I really like playing with that, and I even edited an entire anthology for Baen Books, which is called The Cackle of Cthulhu, and it collected humorous Lovecraftian stories by other authors. So I definitely feel very much at home at that genre, and I suspect that the editor of the Winnie the Pooh anthology expected the humor story from me. But of course, like I said earlier, you really want to, kind of twist expectations, and so I ended up writing like the darkest, grimmest thing that I've ever written in my life, and I can't wait for the readers to check it out.
I remember when I first read Lovecraft, I really liked it, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." But then over time, I'm like, "Yeah, his ideas are great." I'm not. His writing is very much of the era. I like how people like their stuff flows more. It's a little bit less forward, but I mean, he'd be rich now. If he didn't die in the 30s, if he just managed to hang on, he'd be fine now. But all right, that's beside the point. So, how can people reach you? Do you have like an Amazon authors page? Do you have a website? Do you have a publisher site?
So the best place to start is my own site, which is alexshvartsman.com. So just my name.com. It has links to all of my published works. It's where I update things with, has a bibliography page that literally has absolutely everything I've had published, including my novels, short stories, translations, everything.
Okay,
And no, I kind of I keep that updated. I'm also on social media. I'm on most active on Facebook, but I'm on Blue Sky and X as well.
okay.
So people can find me in all of those places. And of course,
I don't even know what Blue Sky is.
Blue Sky is a brand new Twitter alternative, which is kind
Okay,
of where a lot of the refugees from Twitter that didn't like all the recent changes went. But there's a lot of writers on there, and the community is fairly active. So it's been interesting. I don't spend nearly as much time on there. My platform is Facebook. I like it more because I don't like being limited to like just so few characters as a writer, and I don't like having to post nothing but pictures. So Instagram is not right for me again as a writer. So Facebook is a happy alternative for me because I can write something that's
do
a
you
few
think
paragraphs.
TikTok is not for you?
Oh, TikTok is definitely not for me. I'm not a video guy at all. I much prefer to write my I'm a lot more eloquent in written form than I am when I'm trying to speak.
Yeah, well, I think most writers are like whenever I do writer conventions and like you talk to people and they seem like they're very social and they flow really well, and you meet them, they're a little bit stiffer, more awkward in person often. It's because I probably because people are used to like words, they're not used to communication, like verbal communication. But
But this is especially true about humor. When people find out that I write humor, they kind of expect to meet this like Jerry Seinfeld type stand-up comedian. And I can't do that. I can't really be funny on demand all the time. Every once in a
right.
while, I'll come up with a funny quip. But when my characters in the book do it, I have infinite time for them to be funny on the spot.
Well, even most comedians, they have to write stuff up, so they kind of have a backlog of jokes.
Right. Yeah, they work with material. They go to these really small clubs and they test drive their material before they
Yeah.
it. it to a larger audience, to make sure that it works. And the same thing is true for writers. We tend to try out jokes and maybe send them out to beta readers. Send our work and go like, did this work for you? Did you find this funny? Being able to do a live reading at a convention or at an event is always helpful, because when you're doing a live reading of a dark story, the people might absolutely love it, but you really don't know because they're sitting there with their faces somber. But when you're doing a live reading of a humorous story, you get that immediate feedback because you know when people are laughing. And that not only is it gratifying, but it's really helpful because you know which jokes are landing and which jokes not so much.
Yeah, I think like conventions really help too, because like you meet people, like there are people that like they'll buy my book and then I'll talk to them and they're like, I never would have bought your book if I didn't talk to you. Because like, I mean, you have to be a little bit of a salesman, but you talk it up, and just your personality helps convince them that this is worth checking out.
Absolutely, and that's part of the reason you go to conventions and you participate on panels and do all of those things, is that people absolutely get to kind of see you, hear you speak, and then they decide, well, this person is interesting. I wonder what kind of stuff they actually write. And
Right.
I definitely see that. I see that in the Amazon dashboard and things like that, where you come back from a convention and you see an actual spike in sales, and then people will come up to you at the end of the panel and go, "While you were speaking, I bought your book."
Right.
So that's the great thing about shopping online, is that you get them. They place that order before they forget, because then they've gotten to like 3 or 4 other panels and heard other wonderful people speaking there too.
Well, I've even get reviews. They're like, "Oh, I met the author. What a lovely person."
Yeah, yeah.
So it all helps, but it definitely helps to do conventions. So, do you have a Amazon authors page?
Yeah, absolutely. If again, it's under my name, and there's going to be a ton of books on there because, again, I write a lot of short stories, and so there's all sorts of anthologies and magazine issues
Oh,
that are
you're
mixed in
linked
with
to
my own
everything
books.
that you appear in. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're on there, but yeah, it's really important these days that make it easier for people to find you, right? So, and in a way, having a name that's a little bit unique, on one hand, it makes it more difficult because people have to remember it and type it in right. But on the other hand, once they do type it in right, there
They're
are
done.
a lot
Yeah.
fewer. I don't have to compete with like if I was writing under Dave Williams, there'd probably be like 100,000 Dave Williamses out there. So, there's only a very small number of Alex
Well,
Schwartzman
there's
books, and
also
we
the
want to
problem
write
of
science fiction.
the guy who's his first name is Stephen, his last name is King, but it's not the Stephen King. And he
Right.
like sells stuff, and people buy it. They're like, "That's not Stephen King." So I really doubt somebody has the exact same name as you and an author.
Exactly, exactly. So that's in a way that's an advantage because you stand out and makes it a little bit easier to grab your domain name and like your social media
Right, right.
names and everything.
So if somebody wants like an autographed copy, should they email you on the website?
Absolutely, they can. I do have books linked where they can purchase it directly on the website, and I'm always happy to sign them. I also try to do a lot of different events to make sure that people can meet me, and also like if people
Do
already
you have
have
an
the book.
event coming up?
The next one I'll be at is going to be PhilCon in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is
Okay.
November 17th and 18th. I should be there. After
And what's the name of it again?
It's called PhilCon, with
Okay.
the Philadelphia Science Fiction Convention. So even though it's in New Jersey, it's like on the outskirts of Philadelphia.
Right.
And the next one after that most likely is going to be BosCon in Boston in February. So it does slow down in the winter. There's a lot
Right.
more conventions that take place in the summer that I go to, but in the winter it's a little bit slower, which is okay because you need time to actually write new material.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, awesome, man. Last thing I'll ask is, do you have any book trailers or like any like special goodies that people can check out?
Absolutely. So, linked from my page, and I can send you a link so you can include it with the interview as well. There is a book trailer for the book we're talking about, Kakistocracy. There's like a 5-minute trailer. It's up on YouTube. There's also an entire first chapter, which is from the audiobook, which is also posted up on YouTube so people can check it out for free, get a
Okay.
sense of the voice, get a sense of what the book is like. And I don't think there's any better.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But the book trailer was really fun to work on because I got to pick like just a really small snippet that I felt was, the character's voice is extremely sarcastic and and like very like New Yorkerish.
Right.
I needed to convey that in the trailer, and I hopefully if people listen to the trailer and buy the book, then I've done a good job. We'll find
Right.
out.
Yeah.
Kakistocracy, Chapter 1. I stalked the face serial killer across Greenwood Cemetery. The maniac was 7 feet tall, skeletally thin, and freakishly strong, given the apparent ease with which he carried the overstuffed burlap sack slung over his back, like some malnourished Santa.
All right. Well, thank you very much, man. Do you have anything else to promote? Anything you want to tell people about?
Thank you. So yeah, my next book is actually coming out very, very soon in mid-November. I have an anthology I edited that's coming out called The Digital Estate. And this is an anthology of science fiction stories about the interaction of AI and art. So all the talk that we hear right now about ChatGPT and Midjourney and things like that, I've asked some of the best writers in the world from over a dozen countries to come up with stories about artificial minds interacting with art. And so, we have works from Ukraine and China and South America and Madagascar, as well as some really famous authors from the Anglosphere, like Adrian Tchaikovsky and Jane Espenson and Ken Liu, writing stories in the setting. And that anthology will be coming out in just about a week. So I'm ramping up for that.
Okay. Awesome, man. And what that'll be available everywhere, like
Everywhere.
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles.
The only thing is for that one, we haven't done the audiobook. So that's just going to be a print book and an ebook. But that will be available everywhere that those formats are sold.
Okay.
And they're
Awesome,
already
man.
up for pre-order as well.
Okay. Awesome. So they can go to your website and pre-order it.
Yeah. I mean, everything is up, either through my website, through Amazon, wherever it's most comfortable for people to shop for books. My job and my publisher's job is to make it as easy for anybody to get their hands on our books as possible. Like it should not be a quest to find them.
Okay. Awesome. All right, awesome, man. Thank you very much for being on here. Thanks for talking about your experience and what you got going on. And do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you so much for having me. That's about it. The important thing is check out the trailer, check out the previews, read, and see if you like the books.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for being on here again.